You ever notice how God will pull you into a quiet place right when you thought you were supposed to be loud? It's almost as if heaven whispers, focus on yourself and stay silent, not because you're weak, not because you don't have something to say, but because God is doing something in you that doesn't need an audience yet. There are moments when the noise around you becomes a threat to the destiny inside you. And God begins to gather you, steady you, strip away the opinions, the expectations, the comparisons. Oh, He can remind you who you are without all the echoes. It's in that silence that you start hearing the truth again. The truth about your worth, your strength, your assignment. Silence as a sacred space is one of the most underestimated gifts God invites us into. Many people fear silence because they associate it with loneliness, emptiness, or inactivity. But spiritually, silence is not an absence, it's an atmosphere. It's the environment God uses to speak to you in ways you cannot hear when life is loud. When God pulls you into silence, He is not removing you from the world, He is revealing you to yourself. In silence, the layers that were built from other people's expectations begin to fall away, and the truth of who you really are starts to rise to the surface. Silence is where God does inner surgery without announcing it. It is where He reaches into the parts of you that have been ignored because noise made it easy to avoid them. The quiet becomes a mirror, reflecting back the emotions, wounds, distractions, and desires you've tucked away. And even though it can feel uncomfortable, that confrontation is healing disguised as stillness. In this sacred space, you begin to understand that identity is not something the world gives you, it's something God cultivates within you. Silence strips you of the applause that once validated you and the criticism that once crushed you. It becomes the place where your heart is recalibrated and your motives are purified. When you stop talking long enough, when you stop defending yourself, explaining yourself, and proving yourself, you start to notice what God has been trying to whisper all along. The silence teaches you to trust that God is working even when nothing seems to be moving. It teaches you restraint, patience, and spiritual sensitivity. You learn how to differentiate between what you want and what you need, between who you are becoming and who you used to be. Silence is also a spiritual shield. It protects you from reacting out of emotion, from speaking out of frustration, and from making decisions based on pressure rather than purpose. In quietness, God covers you from unnecessary battles because He knows that not every conflict deserves your energy. The silence becomes divine protection against noise that would drain you or distract you from the assignment He is preparing you to carry. It is in silence that your character grows stronger, your mind becomes clearer, and your spirit becomes anchored. What looks like isolation is often preparation. God uses silence as a sacred place to strengthen your identity, refine your purpose, and align your heart with His direction, so that when you step back into the noise, you step in with clarity, authority, and a renewed sense of who you are. The power of inward focus is one of the most transformative shifts a person can make, especially when life feels overwhelming or distracting. Focusing inward is not selfishness, it is stewardship. It is the realization that you cannot pour from a fractured place, and you cannot fight battles outside of you when the real war is happening within. When God calls you to focus on yourself, He is calling you back to the center, back to the version of you that has been overlooked, stretched thin, or buried beneath responsibilities, expectations, and noise. Inward focus is choosing to pause long enough to understand what your soul has been trying to say while you've been busy surviving. It is giving yourself permission to grow without apology and to heal without performing strength for anyone else. When you turn your attention inward, you begin to see the habits, beliefs, and patterns that have been shaping your life without your awareness. Some of those patterns need to be broken, some need to be strengthened, and some need to be completely released. Inward focus creates space for honesty, or honesty about what hurts, what's missing, what you desire, and what God is calling you toward. It teaches you to stop outsourcing your identity to people who were never meant to define you. Instead, you start reclaiming authority over your thoughts, your peace, and your direction. It is in this inward journey that you confront the parts of yourself you've ignored because facing them felt too heavy. But healing can only begin where honesty lives, and inward focus gives honesty a home. Focusing inward also shifts your priorities. Suddenly, you become more intentional about what you say yes to and more protective of what you give your attention to. You start noticing how much energy you've spent trying to fix everything around you while neglecting the work God wanted to do within you. Inward focus redirects your strength from scattered efforts toward purposeful transformation. It reminds you that every breakthrough you desire on the outside must first begin on the inside. You can't build a stable future from an unstable inner life. So God draws your focus inward so He can rebuild you from the foundation up. As you invest in your inner world, clarity replaces confusion. Decisions become easier because you're no longer guided by pressure or fear, but by alignment. Peace becomes less of a moment and more of a lifestyle. You start hearing God more clearly, loving yourself more deeply, and moving through life with a grounded sense of purpose. The power of inward focus is that it equips you to stand strong internally so that nothing externally can shake you out of who God is shaping you to become. Divine redirection is one of the most misunderstood yet powerful movements of God in a person's life. It often shows up in ways that feel confusing at first. Doors closing, people distancing, opportunities fading, conversations ending before you get to explain yourself. In the moment, it can feel like loss or rejection, but in reality, it is protection. When God redirects you, He is not taking something from you. He is steering you away from what could have harmed you, delayed you, or diluted the purpose He planted inside you. Divine redirection is God's way of saying, I see what you can't see, and I'm guiding you toward what you're not ready to understand yet. It is a holy interruption designed to keep you aligned with His plan even when your emotions argue against it. Sometimes God removes you from conversations because those conversations were shaping your spirit more than you realized. Words carry weight, and environments carry influence. When God pulls you away from certain voices, it's because those voices were starting to chip away at your confidence, your identity, or your clarity. Divine redirection protects you from becoming someone you were never called to be. It keeps you from fighting battles you don't need to fight or proving things to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. When God redirects you, He is also revealing who and what cannot go with you into the next season. Not everyone can handle the version of you He is building. Not every place can feed the calling He is growing within you. So He redirects you before you settle, shrink, or sabotage yourself trying to fit where you no longer belong. Divine redirection also teaches surrender. It stretches your faith because you have to trust God without knowing the details. You have to let go without receiving the next step. That gap between what ended and what will begin is sacred ground. It is where belief matures and obedience deepens. You learn to see closed doors not as failures but as divine boundaries that keep you safe. You learn to recognize silence not as abandonment but as guidance. You realize that God is not just directing your steps, He is guarding your soul. Redirection molds your character. It strengthens your ability to hear God above your own desires. It humbles you enough to let go and empowers you enough to move forward. Over time, you begin to see that what felt like a setback was actually a setup for alignment. What felt like separation was actually preparation. Divine redirection is God's way of ensuring that every step you take leads you closer to purpose, closer to healing, and closer to the version of yourself He always intended you to become. Self work as worship is one of the most transformative ways to understand personal growth, healing, and inner development. Many people see worship as something you do outwardly, lifting your hands, singing, praying, or serving. But there is a dimension of worship that happens when you decide to honor God by becoming the healthiest, strongest version of yourself. When you commit to working on your character, healing your wounds, and confronting your patterns, you are not just improving your life, you are responding to God's invitation to rise. Self work becomes an act of obedience because God cannot pour new blessings into an old version of you. He often calls you to grow first so that what He gives you later doesn't crush you. This kind of inner work takes intentionality. It requires slowing down long enough to examine your heart, your habits, your motives, and the parts of you that have been shaped by past pain or survival mode. So often, people pray for elevation, relationships, opportunities, or influence, but overlook the inner preparation required to sustain those things. Worship isn't just a sound, it's a lifestyle. And when you choose to heal instead of hide, to forgive instead of hold on, to mature instead of repeat the same cycles, you are offering God something sacred, a heart willing to change. This willingness becomes an offering more powerful than words because it shows God you don't just want miracles, you want maturity. Self work as worship also means giving God access to the places you prefer to avoid. It's allowing Him to speak into your insecurities, your anger, your fears, and your unmet needs. It's trusting Him enough to let Him dismantle the parts of you that were built on brokenness. Growth can feel like grief because certain versions of yourself must die for the truest version of you to live. But this inner transformation glorifies God because it reflects His desire to renew you from the inside out. The more you heal, the more clearly you hear Him. The more you grow, the more aligned your decisions become. The more you release, the more room you create for what He wants to place within you. Self work becomes worship because it shifts you from surviving to stewarding. Instead of reacting to life, you become intentional with your habits, your mindset, your peace, and your purpose. You begin protecting your spirit like something holy. You start recognizing that your mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being are deeply connected to the calling on your life. When you choose growth, you honor God by showing Him that you value what He invested in you. You demonstrate that you want to live your purpose, not just pray for it. Through self work, you become a vessel that is not only willing but ready for everything God is preparing you for. Elevation through solitude is one of the most powerful yet misunderstood seasons a person can experience. Many people fear being alone because they associate solitude with abandonment or emptiness. But spiritually, solitude is rarely a sign of being forgotten. It is a sign of being prepared. When God allows you to step into a quiet, private season, it is because He sees something developing in you that needs space, protection, and time. Elevation often happens away from the spotlight, where God can shape you without the pressure of opinions, expectations, or noise. In solitude, the distractions fade and the truth becomes louder. You start hearing what you couldn't hear when you were surrounded by everyone else. Solitude becomes sacred ground for transformation. This kind of elevation doesn't happen through crowds. It happens through clarity. When God pulls you aside, He is not isolating you, He is insulating you. He is guarding the growth that is taking place on the inside. Sometimes the reason God separates you is because He's taking you somewhere that requires a stronger, wiser, more grounded version of yourself. And that version can only be developed in environments where your spirit can breathe and your mind can settle. In solitude, you learn how to distinguish between what is essential and what is noise, between what fuels your purpose and what drains your strength. You become more aware of your own voice, your own needs, and your own calling. Elevation through solitude also teaches you discipline. Without the comfort of constant validation or the distraction of other people's opinions, you begin to build consistency, integrity, and resilience. You learn to motivate yourself, encourage yourself, and seek God for direction rather than leaning on external affirmation. This internal strength becomes the foundation of the elevation God is leading you toward. Because true elevation isn't just about rising higher, it's about rising healthier, wiser, and more aligned. God doesn't elevate the version of you that depends on noise. He elevates the version of you that can stand in silence and still know who you are. As you move through solitude, you start noticing how your thoughts sharpen, your spirit strengthens, and your priorities shift. You become more selective about what you allow into your space and more intentional with where you place your energy. You realize that solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a promotion in disguise. It was God giving you room to grow without judgment, room to heal without hurry, and room to discover the strength He always knew was inside you. Solitude becomes the birthplace of confidence, clarity, and spiritual authority, positioning you for a level of elevation that can only come from time spent alone with God.